my impression is that we're seeing Trump's relatively typical negotiating tactics, where he goes with an over-the-top aggressive gambit. But also my very strong impression is that he wants to do everything he can to avoid the war. And I think that by now it's quite obvious that he doesn't want to go to war against Iran, but there's tremendous pressure being put on him to do that. And the pressure is coming from the Israeli side, but we have to remember that what is Israel? Israel is a small nation in the Eastern Mediterranean. The problem is the large voting bloc in the United States, which consists of evangelical Christians and of Zionist Jews, among which are many very wealthy donors who are very influential. And the problem with this is that they have a more complete control of the US Congress than Trump does. So for him, avoiding going to war is a bit of a balancing act. And to the extent that I've paid attention to the American media, they are very much in the warmongering mode, and you have all these foreign policy experts, military experts, who are driving the point relentlessly. What an excellent opportunity this is, like once in a lifetime, once in a millennium opportunity to take down the Iranian regime, and that Trump must do this, that he will, leave great legacy and change in the Middle East and all these wonderful, wonderful things that are going to happen if he goes to war against Iran. Of course, we can now recognize this for what it is. It's just simply more war propaganda, no different than when they went to war against Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and so forth. There's always a class of people there who wants war. It's the bankers, it's the military-industrial complex, and then, in the case of Iran, there's also all these very passionate Israel supporters among Christian evangelicals and Zionist Jews. So far, Trump has been resisting this. And we know a little something about this because from Arakchi, from some members of Iran's parliament, we know that the negotiations between Iran and the United States are going on. That the relationship between Arakchi and Witkoff are good and positive and cooperative. They don't necessarily tell us everything that they talked about. But what I found interesting is that about a week ago, we had maybe 10 days ago, we had the incident when one Iranian drone apparently made it to within the striking distance of USS Abraham Lincoln. And the drone was only destroyed after they scrambled an F-35 jet to shoot down this drone. I found the whole story very strange, almost like they invented the story. And I think that the point was to convey to the public that US naval assets in the Arabian Sea are very vulnerable to Iranian military assets, that they could get sunk, which is a way of the Trump administration saying, hey, we can go to war against Iran, but then, we could lose an aircraft carrier. And that's like 6,000 sailors that will go to the bottom of the sea. So do we really want to do that? However wonderful you think this opportunity is, we stand to lose a lot, which is true, which is why Trump doesn't want to go to war, because it would be absolute suicide. They may perpetuate this these slogans about the greatest fighting force there ever was in the history of the Milky Way galaxy and all this. But they spent 20 years trying to subdue the Taliban in Afghanistan, and they couldn't. And they spent more than 10 years through the Saudi proxy and directly to try to subdue Ansar Allah in Yemen, and they couldn't. They had to finally, withdraw from the range of Yemeni missiles and sign basically a non-aggression pact with Ansar Allah government. And none of these, neither the Taliban nor the Ansar Allah are even close to what the Iranians can do. And so the whole thing is a really dumb idea. But the pressures bearing down on Trump are real. And how do you deal with these pressures? My impression by now is that the American public is so sick and tired of Israel. There's still many supporters in the United States who, see this period of history as rapture and biblical end times, and the fact that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. They don't care. They think this is all, part of the end times. And so, it is what it is. But I think that the mood against Israel is such that if Trump just simply pushed Benjamin Netanyahu under the bus and Israel with it, that he would win a landslide in 2026 in this year's November midterm elections. I don't know if that would be a bold gamble. That would be a very bold gamble because, the media is still against you. The donors are still going to be against you. The big tech, people like Larry Ellison and all these people are going to be against you. But the ordinary people will be with you. And I think that now with the Epstein files coming out, and this is all very closely intertwined with Israel, with Israeli billionaires, I think people have had enough. And I think that this wave is only growing because there's still a lot of people who, don't get their news from the mainstream, from social media. They get it on mainstream media. And many of them haven't even heard of Jeffrey Epstein because mainstream media won't touch the story. They don't tell the people what's going on. But now it's in Congress. It's being discussed everywhere. I think that this momentum is still gathering, and it will continue to gather. And Israel will not come out unscathed. It's obvious that Epstein was closely, even if he wasn't Mossad. I don't know if he was Mossad, but I suspect that he, the Rothschild family have maintained their own private intelligence network. He was probably working for them. But then, they're powerful enough that they have cooperation with MI6, with Mossad, with CIA, and so forth. But somehow, a lot of these roads lead to Tel Aviv. And the farther the story unravels, the more obvious it becomes. And so I think that if you choose to placate your donors and these Christian evangelicals, that's one gamble. But if you choose to say, okay, I want peace, I want the negotiations with Iran to go on, I want to come to a constructive agreement with them, and I will not encourage Israel to go to war, and if they do, they're on their own. I think that this would politically be the winning ticket at this moment, and that given time, it's only moving farther in that direction. And I think maybe this is why, Benjamin Netanyahu panicked, because he was supposed to go meet with Trump on the 18th of February, and he brought it forward to a week earlier, so he went to meet him yesterday. I think that's a sign of weakness on the side of Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu. And I think that Trump's hand is gaining credibility. Now we can't. Oh yeah, and then another thing we found out from one of Iranian MPs is that in negotiations with Iran, the Americans were asking for like a face saving out, and they were saying, well, like if we could bomb 2 or 3 sites in Iran, and then you respond and you bomb 1 or 2 of ours, then we can take care of the rest with the public relations. We'll just say like, wow, that was the most successful operation ever in the history of the world, and we obliterated Iranian whatever, and now it's all fine, and we move on with the next point of business. But it seems that the mood has hardened in Iran, and that people are not accepting that kind of stuff. But it's also a piece of evidence again in favor of the idea that the bombing we had in June was part of this deal. That they said like, hey, give us a face saving out. The Iranians said like, okay, fine, like you bomb 1 or 2 sites, we'll bomb 1 of yours, and we'll call it quits. So that's what they did. This time it doesn't seem that this is the Iranians are going to accept this, and so Trump has to choose. But the choice is becoming so stark because even in the region, the mood against Israel is polarizing. So if you went to war against Iran at this point, you would be antagonizing the whole region practically, apart from Israel and UAE maybe. And you're pushing everybody farther away from yourself and to Iran's side, which means that you might completely erase yourself from that region. You might end up getting completely pushed out and lose all influence in the region. And then it's very unclear what the upside is. What is the upside? There's no upside in fighting for Israel and then, granting them their wishes, because, this thing now where the Benjamin Netanyahu is demanding that Iran limits their missile program to 300-kilometer range so that Iranians would effectively be voluntarily depriving themselves of their strategic deterrent. Of course, they're not going to accept that. And of course, there's going to be no negotiations about this. So it's putting Trump in a position where he cannot, there's no gray area anymore. Either you're on one side or you're the other side. And the additional pressure is coming from the Saudi Arabia, from the Saudis, because the Saudis are feeling themselves pushed into a corner because Israelis, through UAE as a proxy, are kind of moving pieces in place to destabilize Saudi Arabia. So when they take care of Iran, Saudis know that they're next. So Mohammed bin Salman has asked Trump to muzzle UAE and Israelis, to hold them back. And Trump is going to have to choose side. Either you're with Israel and UAE, the two peeps-quick forces in that region, or you're with everybody else, which means you make nice with Iran, you make nice with the Saudi, with Iraq, you play a constructive role in Syria, you play a constructive role in Lebanon, with Turkey. These are all very considerable powers. So I think that Trump himself is being pushed farther and farther and farther to the point where the obvious decision is going to be that, okay, Israelis, if you want to go to war against Iran, good luck to you. We're not going to be backing you. And I think that then leads to a certain polarization in the United States, because all these pro-Zionist forces are going to be furious. But I think that the rest of the country is going to approve of his decision, and is going to. So it's like really like a pivot moment, like an inflection point in not only West Asia politics, but also in the American domestic policies.
Alex, when we look at the, mostly the media who tries to be on the side of Israelis, who is on the side of Israelis, and mostly Israelis and the people in the West who wants to support Israel or want to support Israel, they're basically, you see some sort of panic in Israel because of the negotiations. They feel, before the talks, Steve Witkoff goes to Israel, talks with Israelis, and after the talk, even Netanyahu comes to the United States. They don't feel that they're in control of the negotiations. That's why I think they're trying to do everything to see what is happening, what is the current situation with the negotiations. And do you think that on one side, many people would argue that Donald Trump is Netanyahu's puppet? On the other hand, you see this sort of behavior on the part of Israeli, which shows somehow the opposite. They don't trust Donald Trump somehow. What is this, the nature of the relationship between the two?
Well, Israel is such a hot potato in the American politics that you can't come out and say, I disagree with the policies of the state of Israel. I disagree with Benjamin Netanyahu. I do not support Israeli policy towards the Palestinians, Lebanon, Syria, all these seven wars that you cannot criticize them. Otherwise, you're politically dead. The media is on their side. The wealthy political donors are on their side. People who control most of the big tech are on their side. So it's a very, very dangerous gamble. But it seems to me that now you and I have spoken about this for many, many months now. And I've always said, if I were a Zionist, I would not trust Trump. And now if you pay attention to Israeli media scene, and, you can follow some of their podcasts, which are, translated to English and so forth, you see that they're not happy with Trump at all. And one of the things that happened is that in anticipation of a renewed war between Iran and Israel, they were demanding again that the United States refurnishes them air defense missiles. And the answer from the American side was, sorry, we can't, because we have depleted our arsenals, and what we have, we need to defend our ships and our bases in the region. So, sorry, you're on your own. So that was already a signal that, you're going to have to defend yourself if you choose to go to war. And so there's Trump is not saying Benjamin Netanyahu is wrong. I disagree with his policies, but on the side, they are gradually withdrawing support. And while this is not obvious to Western audiences, it is obvious to the Israelis. So this is why they are now very unhappy with Trump. They are extremely unhappy with Tom Barak in U.S. envoy in Syria, and they're very, very unhappy about the negotiations between the United States and the Iranians. And so, unfortunately, this is a situation that has been, kind of rigged for destruction for many decades now. I mean, going back to the creation of Israel, which has been and still is a British imperial project. And so let's say that diffusing this and bringing the region to peace is going to be a very long-term process. It's not going to happen overnight. But we definitely see the weakening of Israel's hand. And if Trump manages to avoid going to war on Israel's side now, then I think we're coming to a point where Israel begins to simply wither. And because they killed the two-state solution, they will have to embrace the one-state solution. There will be no other choice. The only danger is, of course, that Israelis might reach for a Samson option. And they might decide, like, right, okay, we're on our own, which means we fire off our nuclear arsenal on Iran, or maybe Iran and Damascus and Riyadh and everywhere. And I think that this is a real danger, because obviously, if these people are capable of genocide, then, you know, what's the limit what's the line that they will not cross? I don't think there is a line that they will not cross. So that's the real danger. And I think that this is something that both the Iranians and the Americans have to be very, very watchful with. And I sometimes wonder, you know, because several months ago we learned that suddenly the Iranians found themselves in possession of all the intelligence about Israeli nuclear program and their launch sites and all of these things. I don't know how they got that information, but it's interesting that they do have it. So maybe at some point the Iranians have to clean this up, and if they do, then hopefully they're going to be successful, because Israel with nuclear arsenal is, I think, the number one biggest danger for humanity in general.
I think you've mentioned Tom Barak, which we know he's Zionist, but he loves the United States as well. That's why I think his position on Israel is somehow tricky. He said that Israel must consider, they have to understand the reality of the region. And because the United States cannot go against, you know, more than 1 billion people, Muslim people, because of Israel, because of 8 million people in Israel. And this is the problem that the United States is facing. It's not just about Iran, Alex. It's all about the West Asia, all these countries. You know, you mentioned Saudi Arabia, and the other countries, Qatar, go to Turkey. These countries, they don't feel comfortable with the situation that they're seeing in the case of Gaza and with Israel. That's why the United States has, in my opinion, is at a particular point they have to define what would be the long-term strategy, how long they can support Israel with this sort of behavior. This cannot go forever. If they want to have a better strategy, if they want to survive as a superpower, to improve as a superpower, that's not the strategy. Israel, many people are arguing that the Zionists in the United States, they're so wealthy, they're paying, the donors and all of these things, but there are other players as well coming up. This is not the game just for Israel. And the United States needs the West Asia to remain. This is the...
Yes, exactly. You're exactly right, Nima, because that West Asia, we're talking a number of major powers, all of whom are in effectively hostile relations with Israel now. And we're talking Egypt and Iran and Iraq, and we're talking Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan even, because remember a few months ago, the Israelis were saying, well, once we're done with Iran, then we're taking care of Pakistan as well. So we're talking hundreds of millions of people, major powers, militarily, economically, resource-rich nations, over one little country that is only costing money. And it's a massive infinite money pit, just like, the United States is sending billions upon billions upon billions in terms of money, in terms of weapons and other resources to support this little country that is just picking fights with everybody. And the United States is always on the hook that if Israel starts a fight, the United States has to move in and finish the fight. And so it's not a surprise that, in 2012, there was a major review of U.S. Relations with Israel. And 16 out of 16 intelligence agencies at that time came to a unanimous conclusion that the interests of the State of Israel are adversarial to the interests of the United States. And people in power understand this. But the problem is still that the political climate in the United States is such that you have to be pro-Israel. And I thought it was very strange when Trump administration first came into power. Practically one of the first things they did is they declared their undying devotion to the State of Israel. Everybody practically, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. No, sorry, John F. Kennedy Jr., right?
Yeah. Robert.
Oh, Robert, sorry.
Yeah.
RFK Jr.
RFK Jr.
Which I thought was really strange. Tulsi Gabbard, which I thought was strange. Kash Patel, okay, that one, he's the only one that I actually believe that, for him, Israel is number one. Everybody declared their, Israel is the most important thing in the world. I thought that's really strange, you guys are a little bit, how do you say, when you're overstating something, it's almost like you're covering up with something else that maybe you have a different agenda. So I thought that was strange, but that is just a reflection of the political climate in the United States. If you're not a Zionist, you're dead politically. We had in the UK, there's a similar climate, and it was enough. When the Blairites wanted to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn, it was enough to say that, oh, look, he's an anti-Semite, and his political career was finished. And so I think that the writing's on the wall. I think that Israel is going to have to make peace with its neighbors, or it's going to cease to exist.
Yeah. Alex, do you think that Russia and China would somehow at some point be, I don't know if something of that sort is happening, but in my opinion, at some point there has to be some sort of understanding between Russia, China, and the United States in the West Asia, because if something happens, if let's assume Israel attacks Iran without the United States, if they use nuclear bomb, let's go to the extreme, let's go to the worst case scenario. There has to be some sort of communication between all of these players in the West Asia. Do you see that happening right now?
I'm convinced that there is at least some kind of a framework understanding. And I think that Russia, China, Iran, and at least part of the Trump administration is on the same page. I mean, I think this is why Trump has been desperately avoiding going to war against Iran, because the pressure on him to start this war is about as strong as it's ever been. And it's not the first time, it's the third time. And I think that it's not only in the interests of Israel, it's also in the interests of his political enemies at home, because they know that there's no chance that wouldn't be bad, that it's a suicidal mission. So if they could push Trump, if they could somehow coerce him into going to war against Iran, well, not only would they help Israel, and who knows, maybe if they get lucky, they actually manage to orchestrate a regime change in Iran, but it would be suicidal for him politically. His political faction would lose the midterms 100%, and they would lose the probably the presidential elections, because this wouldn't be a small thing. This would be a big thing, and the fiasco would probably propagate itself in all kinds of way, because the oil price would go high into triple digits, interest rate would spike up, stock markets might collapse in the event of a major war in the Middle East, and so on. So it would be a disaster across the board that would be felt probably for a very long time. And then, the stories about so many thousands of American troops killed, that would be in the media 24/7 all the time. And that would be enough to completely defeat Trump and, whoever is supposed to come into the White House after him. And so it would practically be the end of his political platform. So you would be, if you're a Trump enemy, you would be killing two flies with one stone. So this pressure is going to continue, and it's going through the media, through the think tanks, through the the swamp in the deep state, probably good part of the Pentagon, good part of the NATO military hierarchy, intelligence agencies, military-industrial complex, the banking industry, big tech. Everybody is on that side. Everybody would like to get this war going. And Trump is, he has his support base and a backing, but it's still a very, very complicated balancing act. So I think it's very logical that he needs support from the Russians, that he needs support from the Chinese, and probably, if not directly, then indirectly, even support from the Iranians, which is why I think they, last June, they agreed to that polite war, 25-minute bombing, and then, polite retaliation. And then we say, we completely demolished the nuclear program. We're done. Now we can be at peace again. But, there's public sentiment in Iran as well, and the Iranian people don't want to tolerate that anymore. So, how are they going to defeat this? I don't know, but obviously Trump gave no commitment to Benjamin Netanyahu on his last visit. And so it confirms my suspicion that Trump absolutely doesn't want to go to war. Now, whether he'll be able to persevere or not, we don't know that. But I think that between Trump's people, between the Russians, the Chinese, and whatever anti-war forces exist that support Trump in this, that they will hopefully find a way to stay the course. And then, the next question is what happens to Israel? Because the deeper Israel gets into trouble, the greater the pressure for Trump to come to their aid. So I think it will be impossible to predict the ultimate outcome of all this. But, let's hope and pray that they can stay the course as is.
And the foreign minister of Turkey had an interview with BBC, or if I'm not mistaken, it was BBC, that he said that he's optimistic about the negotiations and he feels that they can reach an agreement, the agreement between Iran and the United States, because everything is ready in both sides. He doesn't see a substantial difference between the two parties. You know what's so amazing about Turkey, that there's so much concern about the situation in Syria. They don't want any other conflict to break out in the Middle East. They're trying to do their best, in my opinion, right now, because they see what is happening in Syria. and how everything can get out of the hand, and that would be hugely problematic for Turkey, because
Yes.
Iran is on they have, they're so close, they're next door to Iran, they're next door to Syria. That's why, the Turkey would be influenced from two sides. And I think one of the main agendas of Netanyahu, which would be a, background agenda on the part of Israel, would put a lot of pressure on Turkey as well. If something happens in Iran, that Turkey would be somehow a sandwich between the two conflicts. And Turkey understands that.
Yes, yes. And, Turkey is already under pressure from Israel on the issue of Cyprus, because the Israelis, they can see the writing on the wall. So they're like buying up properties in Cyprus. They're setting up like a new beachhead targeted against Turkey. Then there's the issue of Greece, which is, armed to their teeth, preparing for a conflict with Turkey at some point, which might be triggered at some point in the future. And then if, let's say, the Iranian regime were toppled, if somehow they managed to topple the regime in Tehran, well, one of the big winners in that would be the Kurds. So that would be the third massive problem for Turkey. So they could be destabilized from three sides. Cyprus, Greece. Cyprus as a new Israeli proxy with support from Great Britain. Greece, which is a festering situation for a very long time. But then one of the ideas that is being floated around this globalist new order for Middle East is to partition Iran, and one of the parts would be the new Kurdistan, which for Turks would be a disaster. So, yeah, the situation is kind of crystallizing in a way that it's pitting everybody against Israel and UAE, right? Their mini-me there in the Gulf. And everybody together has interest in containing Israel. And now the United States is being forced to take sides, which, once upon a time, it was very obvious because the US was the undisputed hegemon. That's no longer the case. Now it has to choose one side of the conflict. And I think that if it wasn't for this big, giant Zionist bloc in the United States, plus all the Jewish donors, it would be an easy choice. It would be a dead easy choice. But the reason that it's not easy is because the same conflict in West Asia has its counterpart in the United States. And now, given that Trump is moving towards midterm elections, which will determine whether he has control over the Congress or has no control over the Congress, it's like almost everything hinges on this moment, everything. And so I think that the public sentiment in the United States is moving in favor of the good choice, meaning the American public is increasingly sick and tired of Israel having any influence on their politics. And I think that with time, that segment of the American population is growing bigger and bigger, and their sentiment is growing stronger because, before, people who were critical of Israel weren't really all that passionate, whereas supporters of Israel were very passionate, very determined people. Now I think this is all inverting. People who used to support Israel are losing faith because of the genocide, because of Jeffrey Epstein, because of all these horrible things that Israel is right in the middle of all of it. Whereas, people who didn't really have a very strong convictions they're now seeing the genocide. They're now seeing the thing with Jeffrey Epstein and how intertwined with Israel is. So now their sentiment is growing very strong and very passionate. So I think at one point, maybe people in the Trump administration are going to say, well, that sounds like a good gamble. Let's just flush the Israelis down the toilet. Let's leave them on their own. If they want to go to war against Iran, let them suffer the consequences. And obviously the consequences are going to be that Israel is going to get wiped off the map.
Yeah. Alex, for such a long time, the project of the West Asia was to separate the countries, from each other, to make some sort of differences between Shia, Sunni. What is amazing to me going to Iran and seeing what is happening inside Iran, considering the people of Iran, ordinary people, those divisions they're not there anymore. And you see some sort of understand, because the Gaza, I think the situation of Gaza and Palestine has changed everything. The behavior of Israel during, since the conflict started on October the 7th, the escalation has started. The behavior of Israel has changed the mind of all of the countries in the West Asia. And the reality of what has happened is somehow perceived by Americans, in my opinion.
Yes.
And that's why the calculations are somehow tricky. And this sort of fear coming from Israelis is understandable, because they know what is happening in the United States, what is happening in the West Asia. And they see themselves alone in the whole calculation. Because you look at, you've mentioned the only country that is not, in my opinion, is not a country. UAE is somehow the puppet of Israel in the West Asia. The other countries are not anywhere close to Israel, anywhere feeling some sort of closeness to Israel.
Yes.
That's the main problem of Israel. It's not just about Iran; it's about the whole region.
Yes. I think that the whole region is drifting farther and farther away from the Zionist project. Well, they were never particularly happy with the Zionist project, but they could be incentivized to go along with it. In the same ways that the UAE did get incentivized. We're going to do business and exchange technologies, and you're going to get credit and all of these things. So they say, like, all right, we close our nose and we do business and we compromise. Almost everybody was ready to do it, but now everybody is distancing themselves from Israel. And we see that particularly Saudi Arabia is feeling vulnerable enough that they are now strengthening their cooperation with Iran. They see that, Iran is there, a real force, a permanent force, whereas the Israelis might make friendly overtures to you today because they want you on their side. But then as soon as they feel that they've taken care of other problems like Syria and Iran, then they're going to turn on you, because they turn on everybody. Because the only, Israel's perception of peace is to destroy everybody else and to be surrounded by complete chaos. It's the old imperial thing. They create desolation and call it peace. That's what Israel is doing. And it's becoming very, very obvious, not only to the rulers of these other countries, but also to the ordinary people. And so there's public pressure on the rulers to distance themselves from Israel. And there's also the alternative, which didn't used to exist before, because now Saudi Arabia is selling more and more of its oil in yuan rather than in US dollars. So, they're not so dependent anymore on their dollar balances in the United States, where, they are forced to spend it on US armament, and they're forced to, normalize their relationships with Israel and so forth. So all of this is changing very, very radically. It's a slow motion process, so it's not from one day to the next, but it's definitely moving in that direction. It's moving strongly. I think that the Saudis recently announced that they will be investing something like $800 billion in Iran for future cooperation and development. So that's very clear that the times are changing, and I think that people in the Trump administration, and Trump included, can't not see that. That's the future. That that train is going in that direction. You can't stop it. You can't reverse it. So what do you want to do? You want to destroy yourself fighting Israel's war? Or do you want to catch that train and cooperate with these very large countries with large populations and resources? All kinds of deals, all kinds of developments are possible. So that's the choice. Do you want to prosper with everybody else and make peace? Or do you want to go to war to support this, little pathogenic parasite in West Asia for no benefit to yourself? No benefit, only downside.
Yeah. Alex, the foreign minister of Iran was asked about the importance of Europe for Iranians. He said that the traits we have with Afghanistan more than what we have with the whole Europe. It's unbelievable. I was, when I heard that, I said, is that real? Is it nothing is happening between Iran and Europe? Is less than what is happening between Iran and Afghanistan? In Iran has decided, the foreign policy of Iran has decided to officially recognize the government of Taliban in Afghanistan. The same that Russia did. Iran is coming to that understanding. I think, but you see Europe is somehow missing all the points. What is Europe today? Who is, I don't know, do you predict, do you see a sea change happening in Europe? Because Starmer, I think he's going to resign. He's not going to be in his position for a long time. You see Merz, the same case, Macron. How about the changes in Europe, and how much of change would come to Europe?
I think that radical changes are coming to Europe, Nima, because we are being governed by very low caliber leaders that were selected deliberately because Europe has been pursuing absolutely insane policies, not just foreign policy, but also domestic economic and social policies. Just as a simple example, Great Britain is investing tens of billions of pounds into net zero policies, right? Among them, they're covering the countryside, the premium agricultural land, with solar panels. At the same time, they're investing into dimming the sun, technologies to spray the skies so that they reduce the penetration of sun to the surface of the country. So you would have to ask yourself, this is completely insane. And if you are intelligence, at least at average level, you would say, like, wait a minute, people, that doesn't make any sense. We're going to rely on solar power, but at the same time, we're going to dim the sun. So you're going to say, I don't think that's a good idea. Well, then people who really wield power in the country are going to say, well, sorry, you're overqualified for this job. You're out. We need to bring somebody who's not going to see any problem with that and is going to continue plowing tens of billions of dollars into all of these cockamamie schemes. And so as a result, you get people like Keir Starmer, you get people like Kaja Kallas, like Ursula von der Leyen, and so forth. And so this has been going on for a very, very long time, that there's been this negative selection, that the only people who could stay in positions of power were probably the least qualified people to lead a nation. So as a result, we are in the situation that we are. And I think that in the United States, it's not only a given that all these governments have to fall, but I think that the United States are going to help push them over the edge. And I think that Merz, Starmer, Macron, probably Sanchez in Spain, I think they're all going down in the near future. And I think that very probably we're going to see the dissolution of Europe, because I used to say that Europe is like the USSR and that it's going to finish like the USSR. But I think that Europe is worse than USSR, because I don't think that people running the Soviet Union were quite as retarded as the ones we have running Europe today. So I think all of these changes are coming our way. It will be very difficult to predict when and how this will happen, and they will not go away peacefully. So we might have, social uprisings, we might have revolutions, civil war, whatever. But I think that these changes are inevitable, because we are in an untenable situation. If it continues like this, Europe would have to turn itself into a bloc, into an autarky, and with time, it will be more and more like North Korea, which I think is impossible, because Europe is not a unitary state. You have French, Germans, Italians, Spaniards, Hungarians, Poles. They will not stay in the same bloc peacefully. And I don't think there's enough force to keep them in the bloc by force.